All right, so now for some of the fun bits. These are Sika coilovers. It's actually a brand I hadn't heard of before I bought the 944. But trying to find coilovers was kind of challenging. It was either, buy springs for it or buy like top of the line coilovers, right? So they made like race car parts for this car. And then they made like kind of cheaper parts. So trying to find something in the middle, not spending a fortune, but also not buying the cheapest thing out there was a little bit challenging. In this case, these are Type 1M coilover is what Sika calls it. They have adjustable dampening on the top, which is nice, as well as adjustable camber plates, which you pay extra for that, along with different spring rates. And actually the body of it is adjustable, which is really nice. So if I unlock one of these, I can actually spin the body up and down, so you can change the length of the overall coilover without sacrificing the compression of the coilover itself. So if you get the dampening kind of locked in, compression, things like that, and you need to make it shorter, you can actually adjust the entire bottom of the coilover up and down to achieve that. So it's really nice. So those are the fronts, and the rears are also, same sort of thing. Really nice kind of setup. Everything, spring rates I got to select, they're like considered like a street or sport, like low. They have extreme low, things like that. It's not really what I'm looking for. This is pretty much all this suggested by the manufacturer, spring rates and things like that. So like I said, I believe they're set up to work with the existing rear suspension. So it should just be the case of pull the front wheels off, install the front coilovers, pull the rears off, install the rear coilovers. I'm going to pull the fronts out first and look at the length. I kind of want to try and match the length of the coilover itself, the new coilover, to the factory suspension that's in there. So let's get started. Just like with my jack, in the past year I've upgraded some of my tools. So you see I've got this new tool rack, chargers going. And I actually have 2 or 3 different types of impacts now, so it really helps getting parts off the car. So yeah, let's get moving and get the wheels off. Taking a quick look at the factory front suspension assembly, looks like we're gonna have to undo these 2 bolts down here. I'm gonna hit them with a little bit of penetrating lubricant. You can tell if I move this a little, these shocks are definitely old, probably factory to the car. So it's probably a good thing that we're replacing them. Down here looks to be the brake pad wear sensor. I'm not really loving the zip tie job here. I'm not sure exactly what the factory mounting is supposed to look like. I may have to do something like that to mimic it, 5 feet or 5 miles an hour, but I would have preferred not to do it that way. So let me go grab some lubricant and we'll start breaking these loose. The real pain in the ass thing about this is this lip right here prevents the socket from going on the nut completely. So I had to be really careful not to strip it because it was kind of at an angle. This suspension is most likely factory. It does not want to go anywhere. So a little trick I learned is to get a wrench on the far nut, which is a 19, this one's a 17. Let that wrench kind of catch on something that you can trust, so it's kind of caught right in the corner of the caliper right here. I know it's not going to do any damage. And let that sit so I could use the breaker bar to get it loose. And I just barely, I'm not the biggest guy, I was just barely getting it loose, but one crank at a time it's coming off, so. All right, the bottom two bolts on the shock assembly are out, so those are completely gone. The hub is hanging by the steering and the bottom bolt. I'm just gonna undo these 4 top nuts, and the whole strut and coil assembly should just drop right out. All right, and that's the front suspension out on the passenger side. So a couple of notes if you're ever doing this. One, there's an attachment for the electronics for the brake wear sensor right here. So I didn't notice that, I had to pop that out. And then there's also a ground mounted right below that as well, and I didn't notice that either. So those were the 2 things I had to do, and then, you know, once I got the strut kind of wiggled, the entire assembly came out. So let's line this up next to the new suspension and look at getting it in. Okay, so as I think we covered, the new Sika coilovers do not have the same provisions that the old suspension has for grounding some of the basically pad wear sensors. I reached out to Sika, and I have to give them credit that their customer support is quick. But their answer was to either use some sort of generic bracket, which isn't something I have kicking around or something I can fab up easily, or to weld on like a similar sort of nut setup so that I can ground this sensor. It seems a little ridiculous. I get that they're supposed to be kind of generic. I'm sure not all 944s were the same. But you figure they would include like something that might work. To get somebody to weld onto this aluminum, it's gonna be a little bit tricky. Plus you're kind of heating up, there's fluid in there, and you have to heat this thing up to when you actually weld to it. So it's just a little bit kind of not impressed with that. I would probably recommend going with a different brand of coilover. What we're gonna do to work around that though, since we have them, they're here, they're open, they're ready to go in, is we are going to actually ground. There's another ground spot on the chassis here that's within the same sort of harness. I'm going to ground to that, run a longer wire down and connect to where that ground was. I've already snipped it just so I could check to make sure I had the right gauge of wire. So I'm going to do a quick practice run right here on these new, I basically have, they're like shrink connectors, but they're also supposed to solder at the same time. So I'm going to do a test run on one of these, and then we're going to actually build that wire to ground up further above the shock body. And then we're also, because it doesn't have provisions for any of that wiring, we're just gonna try to find a good home for it under here and reinstall the new suspension. Like I said, not super impressed with that, but we'll keep working on it. There you go. Just use a ruler to get it down through. There's like a hole in the body right here where there's some wiring, including the wiring for this, and it actually looks like the brake line's here too, which is nice. It gives me somewhere to run this that's kind of not too interfering. So I'm just going to run this here, zip tie it over to the actual wiring harness, and run it to that ground. It should be easy enough. Just setting up some zip ties to try to keep these in the right spots. Suspension back in there. Alright, with that taken care of, I've counted the rings on there. I'm going to tighten up the suspension, the collars on the suspension, make sure that's all good to go. And then we will reinstall. So in the top hat for the coilover, there is a small hole that aligns with a pin on the bottom of this strut tower. So it took a little bit of like rotational centering, tightening kind of cross like you would on a wheel, and eventually I got it to seat correctly. So now I'm just gonna pull up the hub here and lightly bolt it in and then kind of start tightening everything up. So I'm just jacking up the hub to give me an easier way to angle the hub into the suspension. It's kind of, you know, all this stuff has a lot of free movement in it, so it's a lot easier for me to kind of create a shelf here with the jack and just kind of angle everything together rather than lifting and struggling and angling. Definitely a lesson I've taken away from doing this a few times. Alright, so it's both bolts in. I need to get this concentric washer on. The top concentric bolt allows for camber alignment. There's also camber alignment on the top of the suspension. I had to buy a new one because I kind of gacked the threads on the existing one. Ironically, the one I ordered, I couldn't find the actual washers in stock, so I had to order one off eBay. And it has a similar sort of issue where somebody ran the threads through it a little bit. The bolt itself looks better than the one I took out, so I'm still going to use it, but just something to be aware of if you're doing this yourself. Don't take that top bolt out with power tools. Alright, that is the bottom snugged up. So I'm going to drop the jack here down and then tighten up the top, and that'll be the side done. That's it. This side is in. The front passenger side is installed. A couple of things if you're going to be doing this. 19 ratcheting wrench would be really useful. Mine doesn't ratchet. Would have been really helpful because there's not a lot of space behind the caliper to get into where you need to loosen those big nuts that are on the eccentric or concentric bolt back there. Yeah, I wouldn't buy these coilovers. I did get them spec'd to exactly what I wanted, so they're about 1,300 bucks. I think for about 1,600 bucks, you can get like a nicer Coney cup kit or something. I'd probably go that route. So now I'm going to rinse and repeat on the passenger side. I'm gonna go over there, drop it real quick. Hopefully it goes a lot faster than this side, and install the new suspension. So once we do that, we'll start working on the back. I did also contact the manufacturer on that. I had a friend with a similar setup who basically said he didn't have to do anything in the rear besides install the suspension. With these, both sets have springs. With these, I'm going to have to take the torsion tubes out of the rear. So it's turned into a pretty big project for the rear, but we will get it done. Basically, you take the axles out, drop the trailing arms, and kind of, essentially where the spring plates are, drop those, and pull the torsion tubes out, and then we're gonna bolt it back up. I did also get Delrin bushings to put in there. I might not be able to install them. You have to heat the spring plates up and install them and lube them, and just from what I've seen on other builds, it's a nightmare, and I don't have a good way to heat them up. So, excuse me, I may wait on that and do it another time when I have a little more patience and this hasn't been going really poorly. All right, let's get to the other side. All right, so on this side, we actually have a rubber grommet that the wiring is feeding through, the wiring harness for the wear sensor for the brake pads. So just use the old trick of a metal hanger, and I cut one end of it, well, I cut both ends of it, one end to be specifically sharp. You can also heat it up, and poked a hole through the rubber grommet, and now we're just gonna feed that wire down through the rubber grommet into the wheel well so I can wire up that sensor that the coilovers do not have a spot for. So we're gonna do that real quick. And easy as that, done. So I just finished up the wiring. You saw me run that wire down. I crimped one end with just a little circle connector to ground up here where the existing ground was for the other part of the harness, and then connected it to the ground that I had to cut down there. So now, time to install the coilovers. So another thing to be wary of with these coilovers is that on the bottom of the strut tower there is like a little peg that's supposed to fit. It fits in the underside of the whole assembly. Now these coilovers, it's off. It's off by maybe 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. So I had to take a small pry bar. I've tried it both ways on both sides. I had to take a pry bar and basically angle this piece of metal into a hole at like a maybe 45-degree angle as I'm tightening down the bolts in order to get it to mount. Otherwise, I'm gonna break the bolts off trying to get it up. So again, another thing that's supposed to fit, but it's not set up right, it's not built right. So got that done, gonna tighten down the top, jack up the bottom, and bolt it all back together just like we did on that side. I'm gonna finish tightening these ones down by hand just to be careful. Because of that, the way that's set up, I don't want to break anything. So I'm just gonna finish it up by hand so I can feel what's going on without over torquing anything. So that is the final bolts in the suspension here. Just checked the tightness on the coilover. I did that on the other side, but didn't videotape it. And that is pretty much it for the front. I'm gonna toss the wheels on and rotate them. I won't be able to tell until it's actually compressed if it's gonna drag inside here, but it should let me know if it's gonna drag on the coilover, because it only goes outward as it goes down. So if it drags here, it's gonna drag regardless. If I drop it on the ground, that angle shouldn't increase unless it has like a drastic increase in camber. Yeah, so let's do that, and that'll be the front buttoned up. And we can start on the pain in the ass that's gonna be the rear. So that is the front suspension done. I did break it into two different sections, the front suspension and the rear suspension. And that's for a couple of different reasons. Rear's down here. The first reason is that the coilovers weren't really made to fit this car. They were made to fit 944s kind of in general, probably based on the size of the shock body and rough valving and spring rates that would work for this car, but it was not purpose built for this car. I learned that from talking to the support of the coilover company. Kind of disappointed in that. Wouldn't go this route again, but live and learn. Let's see, and then the rears, I talked to somebody with a similar setup. They had a much lighter spring rate in the rear. I didn't know that. So they left their torsion bars in and indexed them basically to lower the car a little bit and take a little bit of spring out of that torsion. These are not run like that. The company, again, that I ordered them from said you don't need increased hardware, you don't need to replace any of the bushings in there. I ordered some Delrin bushings for the rear. I'll install them if I can. I don't think I'm going to be able to. I am going to try and upgrade the hardware as well, see if I can buy something a little bit beefier for the rear. So because of those kind of complications, front's finished, buttoned up, then we're going to move on to the rear. I'll start that next. I'm going to basically blow it apart, see if I can drop down the entire rear suspension, trailing arms, all of that, so I can pull the torsion bars out on both sides. It's definitely a project. From what I've read, it takes people 2 5 to 6 hour days to get it done. I'm working in 1 to 2 hour spurts, while the baby's down. So, but coilovers are done in the front. They seem to fit okay. They've got the adjustability I was looking for, so that's good. Like I said, overall not that impressed. I did measure the sway bars, and they are 24.5 millimeter sway bars. And that's good. It's not the biggest they made. It's also not the smallest. It's probably about, maybe they're 25. If I'm finding that I'm getting a certain type of steering input when I go to drive it, when I would like to take it to a track weekend, I can correct some things, maybe understeer or oversteer by replacing the bars, stiffen up the chassis a little bit, that kind of thing. So we'll see. I'm going to leave them alone for now, but I can always come back to it if I decide that's the route I want to go. So it might be after, but I do have an idea. I'm going to measure the rears when I get back there. So next up, pull the rear wheels off and get started on dropping the entire rear. So it's going to be a good time. All right, thanks for watching, guys. As always, thanks for watching. Tune in next time as I overhaul the 944. If you've got a second, hit that like and subscribe button below. It would really help me out.